Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Thanks very much, Finbar and the school, for inviting me to speak to you this afternoon. I don't think we need to turn off the lights, to be honest.
Do you need further notes yet?
No, but I think
I'd
like to see your faces. Thanks very much for the invitation to talk to you this evening. It remains to be seen, of course, whether you will feel gratitude to the organisers for inviting me to speak to you. I believe you've been having a great conference, and I'm absolutely astonished at how many of you are here this afternoon on such a nice day. Now, I do a fair amount of public speaking, and I do it with one objective in mind. I'm not the sole objective, but I like to tell people what I'm doing in UCD. So I'll start with my baby. You want to hear about my baby?
Sure.
I set up the Centre for Corporate Governance in 2002, and I had been appointed a director in 1990 when I was in my early 30s, and when I tried to find out what do you have to do to be a good director, I found it extremely difficult to find out how to learn to be a good director. So in 2002 I set up this Centre for Corporate Governance, and what we do in the centre is provide training to directors. So I have short courses, customised courses for individual company boards, and then for the addicts I have a part-time diploma in corporate governance. Now, if you bring people in from the real world out to a university, it would be a wasted opportunity not to take advantage of those connections, those stakeholders, and conduct research. So I have quite a number of research students, particularly doctoral students, who are doing research on various aspects of governance, and many of the directors who've come out to the centre are the subjects for research. The directors come from a variety of backgrounds. It's not just what you might think of being the fat cats in the big multinational companies. A lot of them are very ordinary people who are doing state work, who are doing work on not-for-profit boards, as well as private sector, government agencies, etc. So the range of people is quite broad. In preparing for today's talk, I was reminded of a paper that I reviewed recently for a journal. To get published in a refereed journal, you have to go through a peer review process. And I reviewed a paper on board directors in Norway. Norway is interesting for one reason. There's a quota system in Norway where 40% of boards have to be composed of women. And the paper was looking at whether women were empowered such that they were key influencers on the board, or whether they were mere tokens. Now, the results of the research was that the women were key influencers. And I have sent the paper back now 3 times before, and I'm not accepting it, because the paper was completely biased. The title of the paper was that women were mere tokens. The whole discourse in the paper was that the women were mere tokens, and yet the findings were actually that they were key influencers. And I know that you shouldn't, offend your hosts, but if I could humbly comment that the title of today's talk, or this session, it's found the answer first to the question second. And I find that, as an academic, the bias in it as a title, I prefer a more objective approach to the question. What really makes policy in Ireland? And yes, I agree that there is definitely corporate influence, but the real world is so much more complicated than that. So yes, there is corporate influence, but there's an awful lot of other influence as well. And let's look at the question from a more holistic perspective. I'd like to start at quite a high level with the question of the culture of the country. Because what happens in Ireland, and I'm not going to go into Europe, that's just too big for me. Ireland is about as far as I can go on this topic. But, you know, in looking at what happens in Ireland, you have to look at the culture of the country. And it's the tone from the top that influences the way in which we do things in this country. And an example of tone from the top, I think, is exhibited in spades by the Obamas. I think they exhibit incredible standards of ethics that you would expect of people whose previous career was devoting themselves to working in communities and all the rest and being of service to people. But their clothes, guess what about the Obamas? And it's very unusual. They pay for their own clothes. And what they wear has the ability to make corporations massively rich. Now, by coincidence, and I prepared this for a different talk I gave, but there's an American academic from the Stern School of Business in New York University gave a talk about Michelle Obama's wardrobe. And this was an incredibly cynical piece of research. And the objective of this academic was to catch out Michelle, to find that the clothes she was wearing was making people rich. And guess what? He had a problem. Because try as he would, he could not find strong results for his expectation that the Obamas' objective is to make themselves rich. So that man is creating a culture in America. Not everybody in the States, as we can hear on the media, particularly likes the culture that he is creating. But the one thing is, he is trying to stand up to Wall Street. It's hard to do, but he is trying to stand up to Wall Street. And it is extraordinary, the opposition that he is receiving. But nonetheless, they're chipping away very effectively. And I was at a talk on Thursday night in which the US Senate is bringing in new requirements about disclosure of remuneration, and that the remuneration has to be disclosed as a multiple of the average pay in an organisation. So how many times more is the CEO getting paid than your ordinary worker in the organisation? I think that's quite a good development. But of course, these people have their little jiggery-pokery ways to get around all these rules and regulations and hide the perquisites that they extract from companies. Now, of course, you may not realise this, but this is a question of religion. This was the head of Goldman Sachs. We are doing the work of God. What else? We are doing the work of God. Now, going back to more locally, Mickey Mouse money. That is the view of one of our esteemed consultants, medical consultants, around the consultant's contract, which pays about €240,000. Nice money if you can get it. Mickey Mouse for those people. And I find it very interesting, by the way, that this group, whom you could argue is one of the most powerful in the country, this is about real power, by the way. Forget about corporations. Life or death power. And woe betide us if we pay life or death power people with Mickey Mouse money. But I find it interesting that this group, possibly one of the wealthiest in our society, is represented not by one trade union, one is not enough, 2 trade unions. I leave that with you by way of a thought. So it's all about the culture, and whether our culture is one of service to our country, service to the people, or whether our culture is one of greed. And this is something that we as individuals have a role to play. Now, let's come down to everyday life. I am always really offended by the number of taxi drivers who say to me, you know, I'll give you another receipt. You know, in other words, they want to give me, or if 4 people share a taxi, I'm talking from experience, give a receipt to every one of the 4, even though one person paid the bill. And I say to those taxi men, I am not in the habit of defrauding my employer. And by the way, guess who is my employer? You are. The taxpayer pays my salary. If I submit a fraudulent taxi claim, I am defrauding you. You are my employer. And this goes on so often that it is endemic in our culture, and we as individuals have to ask ourselves as individuals questions about that kind of behaviour. And how many people, I'd like to ask you, do as I do, and by the way, I'm no saint, so, I mean, I don't want to, but I just find that the taxi driver steps back when I say, I'm sorry, I don't want your receipt. I am not in the habit of defrauding my employer. And this taxi driver goes, oh God, she's nutter, right? That's what being honest is. You're a nutter. Nobody else says that to me in my taxi. So it comes down to us individuals and how we behave, right? And continuing on with the culture in Ireland, am I the only person that found those ads from the Licensed Vintners Association offensive? The ad that says that cute whore is a term of endearment. And I'm saying, I don't see what's anything endearing about that. Cute whore is a term of endearment, right? Let us look at some endearing people in this respect, right? We as individuals have to challenge these kind of notions and look for something better than cute whore. But we as individuals are what led to that. Because you talk about power and politics, Ireland, I believe, has a political system that is more democratic than any other political system in the world. And single transferable vote, multi-seat constituencies. The people have incredible power in our political system, electoral system, much more, I believe, than any other country. And the people is who elected these people. And if you're concerned about the influence of corporations on politics, well, it's a relationship. You have the corporation on one hand and you have the politician on the other hand. We influence one side of that transaction by virtue of how we behave in the ballot box. So we as a country and we as individual people have to examine our conscience and say, if you have been found with your hand, I lie, up to your elbow, up to your armpit in the till, should you elect a man like that to top the poll? That's the people's decision. That's not corporate power. That is the people. And we have to acknowledge that up front, okay? Now, I'm nearly there, right? So, our political system. Let's discuss our political system. And our political system is about the messenger boy. It is clientelist to the nth degree. And if you aren't clientelist, you will not get elected. And I can tell you the politicians know that in spades. And therefore, anybody, big business, middle business, small business, ordinary people who go to politicians, they receive the messenger boy treatment. What do you want? I'll get it for you. What do you want? I'll get it for you. No questions asked. And that applies small, middle, large. Across the piece, what do you want? I'll give it to you. And is that a good way to run a country? Is it good that it's all about self-interest? And where is service to the people? And where is service to your country? If it's all about gimme, 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 I want, and your politician is learned that that's the system. Give them what they want. It's not good for the country. It doesn't matter. Give them what they want, because I need to get elected. That's what I want. I don't care about the country. I care about getting elected. So let's again hit those nails on the head. And some of that culture is why we are where we are, one of the worst countries in the world, is because no politician, opposition or government, by the way, somebody said to me last week, Fianna Fáil has been in government for years. Is that not part of the problem? I said, well, I've never heard an opposition politician during the days of the Celtic Tiger mention one kind of cautionary note. In fact, the opposition drove the government to even greater heights of extreme, heating up the model so that eventually it broke. And all politicians, both government and opposition, fed in to that hothouse. And it's because our politicians learn the last thing you say to the people, and we're not talking about corporations, the last thing you say to the people is no. You learn to get elected, you have to say to the people, what do you want? I'll give it to you. You're going to break the country, I don't care. What do you want? I'll give it to you, in the hope that I get re-elected. It's not about national interest, but give the people what they want. Be careful of what you wish for. You could break the system by giving everybody what they want. And to finish off at last, you're saying, when is she going to actually talk about the topic at hand? I'm kind of skirting around it, but this, I suppose, captures my view that it is not just a simple, linear question of corporate influence. That, of course, is a feature, but it's much more complicated than that, and it's much more holistic. At the centre of it is those voters. Because the influencees, the people who are influenced, are put there by the voters. Let's, as voters, make sure that the people we put there are people who genuinely are interested in the country, people who are genuinely of a service disposition. And that may entail them occasionally telling us, no, you can't have X, because it wouldn't be good for the country. And that's leadership is sometimes involves telling people what they don't want to hear. Now, in terms of key influencers, of course the corporation, I accept that totally, but there are other incredibly powerful groups. The media, and by the way, I don't mean Murdoch types, right? I mean the individuals who report politics. We learn about politics through their lens. They are the mediators of what happens in politics. And having had some close-hand experience of the political world, sometimes their dishonesty absolutely shocked me. And, telling us, the people, what they want to do, what's the phrase they say, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. And, I've been amused at, for example, the kind of reaction to Brian Cowan, we'd say, as Taoiseach. He is absolutely no different than he was 10 years ago. But the media lens gave you a different impression of him than you have now. And that impression was entirely mediated by the media, and that's by the individual journalist. There was no big corporation influencing their commentary, but they mediated the narrative in the way they wanted to mediate the narrative, and it wasn't necessarily the truth. I think Social Partners and the Social Partnership was extraordinarily influential during the Celtic Tiger era. That was a massive influencer. I would say just as big as the corporations. The media, yes. So I'd like to leave you with the view that how you behave yourself influences. You are influencers. How you behave yourself influences, not just corporations. and to leave you with, I think, a rather, neat summary of personal behaviour, and that is, if it is to be, it's up to me. And we have the power to influence. So let's exercise that power in a good way. And let's exercise our power to make sure that there are politicians there, elected by us, who will not open themselves to influence by corporations. So thanks very much for listening to me.